What if one of the quarters in your pocket right now is worth more than you think? Today on Change Your Life, we're revealing 3 Washington quarters that collectors still pay close attention to. 1979 Washington Quarter, no mint mark. 1998 D Washington Quarter. 1986 P Washington Quarter. These quarters feature the classic eagle reverse design and may look like ordinary pocket change after years of circulation. But some examples stand out because of rare errors, valuable varieties, and hard-to-find conditions. The truth is, valuable coins often hide in plain sight while most people spend them without ever taking a second look. Before you use your next quarter, check it carefully because a small coin could be hiding a big surprise. Let's start with coin number 1. Have you ever looked at a Washington quarter and immediately spent it without thinking twice? Most people do. A quarter is just 25 cents. Nothing more. Nothing less. At least that is what people assume. But every now and then, a coin survives long enough to develop a story that becomes far more interesting than its face value. And today's first coin is one of those quarters. The 1979 Washington Quarter with no mint mark. At first glance, there is absolutely nothing dramatic about it. No bright color. No unusual design. No special commemorative theme. Just the familiar portrait of George Washington on the front and the iconic eagle on the reverse. Simple. Ordinary. Forgettable. Or at least that is what it appears to be. Because sometimes the most overlooked coins become the most fascinating ones to study. The year 1979 was an interesting moment in American history. The country was entering a new era. Technology was changing. Culture was changing. The economy was changing. Yet throughout all of that uncertainty, one small quarter continued moving from hand to hand across America. Nobody paid much attention to it. Why would they? It was created to circulate. Created to be spent. Created to disappear into everyday life. And that is exactly what happened. Millions of people carried these quarters. They sat inside pockets. They rolled around in cash registers. They disappeared into vending machines. They traveled through grocery stores, gas stations, restaurants, and shopping malls. Every transaction added another chapter to their journey. Every scratch told another story. Every worn detail became evidence of a life spent in circulation. That is what makes heavily circulated quarters so fascinating. They are not museum pieces. They are survivors. Think about how many opportunities this coin had to disappear forever. Lost beneath car seats. Dropped into storm drains. Thrown into jars and forgotten. Damaged beyond recognition. Yet somehow some examples survived decade after decade. And that survival creates curiosity. Because every surviving coin carries a mystery. Who owned it first? How far did it travel? How many states did it cross? How many people held it? Nobody can answer those questions completely. And perhaps that is exactly why collectors find old circulating coins so interesting. The unanswered questions become part of the story. Now imagine finding one of these quarters today. Not inside a collection. Not inside a display case. But mixed into ordinary change. Most people would never notice. Their eyes would move directly past the date. Directly past the details. Directly past decades of history. And that is why old quarters continue to fascinate collectors. Not because they always look extraordinary, but because they hide extraordinary journeys. The 1979 quarter represents something many people forget. History is not always found in famous artifacts. Sometimes history hides inside ordinary objects. Objects that people use every day. Objects that quietly survive while the world changes around them. For decades, this quarter witnessed America evolving. New technologies appeared. New generations arrived. Entire industries changed. Yet this small copper-nickel-clad coin continued its journey. Silent. Unnoticed. Patient. waiting for someone to take a closer look. And that is where the story becomes interesting. Because once you stop seeing it as 25 cents, you start seeing it as a traveler, a witness, a survivor. A small piece of American history that somehow managed to remain part of everyday life. Most people will never think about a quarter this way. Most people will continue spending them without a second thought. But collectors often see something different. They see stories. And sometimes those stories are far more valuable than the coin itself. Because value is not always measured by money. Sometimes value comes from history. Sometimes value comes from survival. And sometimes value comes from a journey that lasted nearly half a century. The 1979 Washington quarter is a perfect example of that idea. A coin millions ignored. A coin millions spent. A coin millions never noticed. Yet a coin that still manages to capture attention today. And this is only the beginning. Because the next quarter in our story followed a completely different path. And its journey may be even more surprising. Now let's move forward to the second coin. The 1998 D Washington quarter. And unlike the previous quarter, this one comes from a period that many Americans still remember clearly. That is what makes it interesting. It does not feel ancient. It does not feel historic. It does not immediately create the same reaction as a coin from the 1940s or 1950s. In fact, many people still think of the late 1990s as recent. But time moves faster than most people realize. And suddenly a coin that once looked brand new has been traveling through circulation for decades. Think about the year 1998. The internet was growing rapidly. Technology was changing everyday life. The world was preparing to enter a brand new millennium. Everything seemed focused on the future. Yet while people were looking ahead, millions of Washington quarters quietly entered circulation. One of them was the 1998 D quarter. Fresh from the Denver Mint. Bright. Sharp. Untouched. At that moment nobody knew where its journey would lead. Nobody knew who would hold it first. Nobody knew how many miles it would travel. Nobody knew how long it would survive. That mystery began the second it entered circulation. The first transaction. The first pocket. The first scratch. The first sign of wear. Those small moments may seem unimportant. But together they create a story. And every circulated coin has one. Imagine this quarter spending years moving across America. From city to city. From store to store. From one generation to another. Everywhere it went, it became part of ordinary life. Not famous life. Not headline-making life. Ordinary life. The kind of life that history books rarely record. That is why coins are such fascinating historical objects. They witness moments nobody else remembers. The family road trips. The quick purchases. The lunches. The movie tickets. The everyday transactions that slowly disappear from memory. Yet the coin remains. And that survival creates something powerful. Perspective. Because when you hold a heavily circulated 1998 D quarter today, you are holding something that successfully moved through years of constant use. Years of opportunities to disappear. Years of opportunities to be damaged beyond recognition. Years of opportunities to be lost forever. Yet somehow it survived. That alone makes its journey remarkable. Many people think collectors only care about rarity. But experienced collectors often appreciate something else. Stories. History. Connection. The ability of a simple object to carry decades of experiences. The 1998 D quarter represents exactly that. A coin created during a rapidly changing America. A coin that witnessed the final years before the new millennium arrived. A coin that quietly traveled through countless transactions. And a coin that most people never paid attention to. That last part is important. Because the most overlooked coins often become the most interesting. Everyone notices unusual things. Everyone notices something flashy. But ordinary objects? Those are easy to ignore. And because they are ignored, their stories remain hidden. The 1998 D Washington quarter spent years hiding in plain sight. Millions saw it. Very few truly looked at it. That difference matters. Because looking and seeing are not the same thing. Most people look at a quarter and see 25 cents. Collectors often see a timeline, a journey, a connection to another period of American life. That is what transforms an ordinary coin into something memorable. Not magic. Not mystery. Not unbelievable wealth. But history. Real history. The kind of history that quietly survives inside everyday objects. And perhaps that is why so many people become fascinated by coins. They remind us that the past is never as far away as it seems. Sometimes the past is sitting inside a coin jar. Sometimes it is hiding in a drawer. Sometimes it is mixed into pocket change, waiting for somebody to notice. The 1998 D Washington quarter spent decades doing exactly that. Waiting. Traveling. Surviving. Telling a story without speaking a single word. And believe it or not, the final quarter in today's story may have an even more fascinating journey. Because its path through American life unfolded during a completely different era. And that changes everything. Now we arrive at the final coin in today's story. The 1986 P Washington quarter. And this quarter may be the most overlooked of them all. Not because it is impossible to find. Not because it looks dramatically different. But because it comes from a year that most people rarely talk about. That is what makes it fascinating. When collectors discuss Washington quarters, attention often jumps to older dates. The very old coins. The famous coins. The quarters that instantly grab attention. Meanwhile, the 1986 P quietly sits in the background. Ignored. Overlooked. Forgotten. Yet sometimes the quietest stories become the most interesting. Think about America in 1986. The country was different. The technology people used every day was different. The cars looked different. The music sounded different. The way people communicated was different. Everything belonged to another era. Yet during that time, millions of Washington quarters began their journey. One of them was the 1986 P. Freshly struck. Bright. Clean. Perfectly detailed. Ready to enter circulation. At that moment, nobody knew what would happen next. Nobody knew how long it would survive. Nobody knew how many people would eventually hold it. Nobody knew how many miles it would travel. And that uncertainty is where every great coin story begins. The moment a coin leaves the mint, its future becomes completely unpredictable. Some coins disappear quickly. Some are lost. Some are damaged. Some spend years hidden away. And some begin incredible journeys through everyday American life. The 1986 P quarter belongs to that story. Imagine this coin entering circulation during the 1980s. Moving through stores, gas stations, restaurants, shopping centers, traveling from one hand to another. Again. And again. And again. Every transaction added another layer to its history. Every year added another chapter. And with every passing decade, its story became longer. That is what many people fail to realize. Coins are not frozen in time. They evolve. A coin changes every day it remains in circulation. The sharp details slowly soften. The surfaces become worn. Tiny marks begin appearing. Each one represents another moment in the coin's life. Another place. Another owner. Another forgotten transaction. And those forgotten moments create something fascinating. A hidden history. Nobody knows exactly where a particular 1986 P quarter has been. Nobody knows exactly how many pockets it traveled through. Nobody knows how many cities it visited. That mystery remains unsolved forever. And perhaps that is what makes old circulating coins so captivating. They leave clues, but never complete answers. Collectors love that. Because every coin becomes a puzzle. A puzzle missing most of its pieces, yet somehow still telling a story. The 1986 P quarter may have witnessed countless moments. Moments nobody remembers today. A family vacation. A trip to the grocery store. A movie ticket purchase. A lunch break. An ordinary day. Then another ordinary day. Then thousands more. One by one. Year after year. Until decades passed. And suddenly what was once an ordinary quarter became a survivor. That word matters. Survivor. Because surviving circulation for decades is not easy. Millions of coins enter circulation. Not all remain visible for long. Yet some continue moving through the economy year after year. The 1986 P quarter is one of those travelers. One of those survivors. One of those coins that quietly endured while the world changed around it. And the world changed dramatically. New technologies arrived. New generations appeared. Entire industries transformed. Yet somewhere along the way, countless 1986 P quarters continued circulating. Silent witnesses to history. That idea changes how you look at coins. Suddenly they become more than money. They become connections. Connections between different eras. Different generations. Different moments in time. The 1986 P Washington quarter represents exactly that. A small object carrying decades of history. Not dramatic history. Not famous history. Real history. Everyday history. The kind that millions of people lived but rarely stopped to notice. And that brings us to an interesting realization. All three quarters we explored today share something important. The 1979 quarter. The 1998 D quarter. The 1986 P quarter. Different years. Different journeys. Different eras of American life. Yet all three spent decades hiding in plain sight. Millions of people saw them. Millions of people spent them. Millions of people ignored them. Without ever thinking about the stories they carried. And maybe that is the biggest lesson of all. Sometimes the most fascinating discoveries are not hidden in museums. They are not locked inside vaults. They are not buried underground. Sometimes they are sitting quietly in everyday change. Waiting for somebody to stop. Look closer. And finally notice the story that was there all along.